Wicked cool. Feature alert.
Hey there, podcast fans. Thanks for listening. Now, you can also reach out and send me a text message. On every episode, at the top of the show notes, you'll see a link that says, send us a text message. Simply click it, write something super nice and sweet, and away we go. Also remember to please subscribe, share this podcast with a friend by telling them about it, and leave us a positive review, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast streaming service, or even on our website at www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com. Tonight's episode is dedicated to a dear friend, John Drachman. John passed unexpectedly on January 20th. Gone way too soon, but not soon forgotten. John, I hope you pass peacefully into the light, and we'll see you on the other side. As for tonight's episode, we have Dr. Kristy Sumner of Soul Sisters Paranormal. And folks, if you want a primer on how to do ghost investigations right, this is the person to listen to. It's coming up right after this opening bit.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing. Nothing.
In 2014, Dr. Kristy Sumner coupled her passion for travel, history, and the paranormal when she formed Soul Sisters Paranormal, an all-female team made up of Sumner, her two sisters, and two friends. As a team of 5 investigators, Soul Sisters Paranormal traveled to some of the most historic and reportedly haunted locations of the United States in an attempt to determine for themselves if spirit activity does exist and to highlight the rich history of each location. Individually, each member of the team is an accomplished professional in her respective field, and each holds a master's, PhD, or JD degree. The team traveled to and investigated numerous U.S. locations, including the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, the Lizzie Borden House in Massachusetts, the Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa, the St. Augustine Lighthouse in Florida, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee, and many others. In 2020, Soul Sisters Paranormal moved to a 2-investigator format, with only Kristy and her twin sister, Dr. Jenny Sumner, conducting the paranormal investigations. Prior to forming Soul Sister Paranormal, Kristy, who holds a PhD in public affairs with an emphasis on criminal justice, was a senior director for a registered travel company focused on biometric clearances for the traveling public. She was a senior consultant for a biometric credentialing company, and she was college professor at Metro State College of Denver and the University of Central Florida. Their website is www.soulsistersparanormal.com. That's www.soulsistersparanormal.com. Check it out after the show. What an awesome show we are going to have tonight. I just know this because I've heard her on many other podcasts, and she's always phenomenal. Welcome, Dr. Kristy Sumner from Soul Sister Paranormal.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you having me on tonight.
Yeah, I was on a show called, was it Mind Dog TV? And he recommended you at the very end that you were someone I should reach out to. So I love it when I get referrals like this.
Yeah, Matt's a really good guy. So I appreciate him connecting us because I think this is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, so let's start back at the very beginning. Back in 2014, which really doesn't seem that long ago, you formed Soul Sisters Paranormal with yourself, 2 sisters, and 2 friends. Mm-hmm. And if I recall, this was just kind of the first of one of your girl trips. And then it just kind of stuck after that because you guys had so much fun. Can you tell us about that trip and where you went?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're correct. So Soul Sisters Paranormal was formed in 2014 with myself, my twin sister, and our younger sister, Michelle. And then we had 2 female family friends join as well. So we're an all-female team. And because my sisters and I live in different parts of the country, we would routinely get together and have girls' trips. And one of those trips included a trip to Moundsville, West Virginia, which is where my mom is originally from. We were going to go up there and just spend a long weekend, just hanging out with extended family members and just doing some stuff up there in West Virginia. And that also happens to be where the West Virginia State Penitentiary is located. So we had a family friend that sat on the board of that facility. And he said, while you're here, why don't you just stay the night in our prison one of those nights and see if you can connect with any of our resident spirits. So we always wanted to go on a paranormal investigation. So we absolutely jumped at that chance. And that experience was so compelling for us that we decided that we wanted to investigate further. And that just really kind of snowballed into us forming Soul Sisters Paranormal, really to go to these locations for the historical narrative, but also to see if we could couple that with any paranormal activity that we could find during investigations.
Now, do you remember who got the first piece of evidence? Was it you, your twin, or your friends, or your other sister?
Well, during that night, it was kind of a mix of all of us because we all really just stayed together in a group that night. But we were all hearing things, large door slams that we knew that there was nobody in those cell blocks. So there'd be no reason why those cell doors would be slamming. There was one instance where we were in the 2nd floor infirmary. And the way you access that infirmary, it's a long hallway. Just picture a long hallway with exam rooms on either side of the hallway. And at the end of that hallway, on either end, there are large concrete and steel stairwells that go up. So either end, you can access this infirmary hallway. And so we were sitting in the middle of that hallway, and it's completely dark. And we were saying things like, come up and take your medicine. It's time to see the doctor. It's now time to see the psychiatrist. And we were hearing footsteps run up those stairs. They were so loud that we were expecting something to materialize out of the darkness. That's how loud they were. We all heard it at the same time. We heard it in the moment. We were fortunate enough to capture it on audio recordings. Yeah, it was just one of those things that was really compelling to us and really just kind of led to that sense of exploration that this is something that we wanted to pursue further.
Now, you guys, or you girls, you ladies, I guess I should say you guys, because Soul Sister, right? You went to a lot of historic places to launch your career, mm-hmm. which is great because I've always, thought that ghosts are like history, right? I mean, mm-hmm. It's really their history. And so some of the places you went to was the Lizzie Borden House, where I live in Massachusetts. I've been there. Okay. The Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa, mm-hmm. the St. Augustine Lighthouse in Florida, a couple others, which I'm sure I'm missing. Mm-hmm. In your first couple of years, which had the most activity for you?
As our technique really kind of grew, that, like I said, that first investigation was extremely compelling, and we had things like the footsteps, the door knocks, and the door slams and such. But from there, we really kind of established our technique on how we would investigate. Now that being said, there were some things that we weren't expecting in some of these locations that we were extremely fortunate to capture. So after the West Virginia State Penitentiary, our next investigation was the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which is located in Weston, West Virginia. So we did this a few months after we did West Virginia State Penitentiary. And that one was extremely active. Again, we were capturing footsteps. A lot of our equipment was alarming when there shouldn't have been anything acting upon it. We had a really interesting, what we call flashlight sessions. We captured a very loud disembodied scream that we have no idea what the origin was from that scream. So during all of our investigations, I would say the most active with regard to paranormal and unexplained activity would be the old Gilchrist Country Jail in Trenton, Florida, mm-hmm. Probably followed by Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Petros, Tennessee. But every location that we've gone to, for the most part, we've been able to capture at least something, one or two pieces of evidence that is pretty compelling.
Now, at these historic locations, is it more residual energy or do you get kind of intelligent spirits?
We get a mix of both. We've had some very interesting, intelligent responses, that we really can't explain. For example, we were at Prospect Place Manor, which is in Ohio. And this was a location that was part of the Underground Railroad. It was built pre-Civil War. But the gentleman that built it, he was really into helping the slaves move through the Underground Railroad. So there was a lot of history surrounding that house. And we were there. We had actually my mom joined us on that investigation. So she was a guest investigator on that one.
Wow, cool.
But we had some voice recorders and some night vision video cameras up in one of the rooms. One of the typical questions that we ask when we go on an investigation is, will you allow us to tell your story? Will you allow us to speak with you? Can we talk to you tonight? And so we had just finished an EVP session in one of those upstairs rooms, and we had gone down to the first floor, and two of us were on the first floor and the rest of us had gone down into the basement. So there was nobody up on that second floor, but yet we captured a voice with a very distinct accent that none of us possessed. And it says, "They here to talk to us."
Oh, that was one of your videos. That was phenomenal. That was like my favorite EVP, I think.
Right. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, on your website, there's like an overview kind of introductory video, and you capture some of your original findings. And I thought that was one of the most compelling EVPs that you had. You have a lot of great ones, but that one really stuck with me.
Well, thank you. Yes. And so to back to the original question. So that is extremely intelligent, right? It's a voice that understands that we're there, that understands we're there to speak with them. And they're acknowledging that. And so it also leads to us to think that there's more than one spirit, right? That spirit was making that comment to probably another spirit in the house. So we've had a lot of great captures with regard to intelligent EVPs, but also those residual EVPs as well. Probably one of the best examples of a residual EVP was at the Ma Barker House in Central Florida. And this is the site of the 1935 shootout between two members of the Barker Carpus gang, Ma and Fred Barker, and 12 members of the FBI. And so the shootout culminated with the death of Ma Barker and Fred Barker in the upstairs room of this house. So we were actually the first team to investigate this location. And we had some voice recorders up in what I call the kill room, which is the second floor room where the bodies were found after the shootout. What we had done is we had set up all of the equipment on the anniversary of the shootout, and we left. We left everything locked up in there to record because we did want to see if we could capture some residual activity. At about 5:30 in the morning, which is when the shootout would have occurred 83 years prior to this date, we captured two voices. The first one said, "Freddie." The second one said, "Yeah, Ma." And the first one said, "Get ready," which I think was residual. I do think that was what was said before the shootout commenced in 1935. So that to us has probably been the most compelling residual capture that we've had so far.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Did they move the Ma Barker house to another location? Was it physically moved from its original location?
It was. So in 2016, well, let me just backtrack just a little bit. So the house was built in 1932 by a guy by the name of Carson Bradford. So he actually built it as a vacation home there on the shores of Lake Weir in Ocklawaha, Florida. And so he, unbeknownst to his wife, he actually rented the house in 1934 to a couple who used the alias T.C. Blackburn. So Mr. and Mrs. T.C. Blackburn. And so they just said that they were a couple from the north and they wanted to escape the winters. So he rented it to them, unbeknownst that they were Ma and Fred Barker. And so on January 16th, 1935, that's when the shootout happened. So after the shootout and the death of Ma and Fred, the family actually preserved the house as it was right after the shootout. So there's still bullet holes inside the house. And, the sconces are still there, the hardwood floors, the doors, pretty much everything but the windows is all original. And they maintained it that way up until 2016. In 2016, the family decided to sell the house, and the new owners who bought the land and the house decided that they were going to demolish the house.
Oh, God.
They only wanted the land because it's really pristine lakefront land. So Marion County, Florida said that they'd pay $215,000 and they would take the house. And the only way to move it off of the land was to put it on a barge and float it across Lake Weir. So it went about 4 miles across this lake to a state park that is run by Marion County. And it sits there now on about 40 acres by itself. There's nothing around it. So there's no light pollution. There's no noise pollution or anything like that. So after it was moved and Marion County had control of it, then I went to Marion County and I asked if we could be the first team to investigate that house. And they graciously allowed us to do that.
Now, that's one of those cases where the ghosts went with the house. 'Cause a lot of times you have like the Conjuring house, the Conjuring house from the movie series.
Yep.
I was lucky enough to go there once, and a psychic stepped out. As soon as he stepped on the ground, he's like, "Oh my God, it's the land, right? The land is more cursed than the house." And your situation with the house, since it was an activity that happened inside the house, it seems like that stayed with the house. So no matter where that house goes, that activity is going to be with the house.
Right. And the way I explain that is the Barker Karpus gang, they were the most prolific gang of the late 1920s, early 1930s. So as a gang, they amassed more money in their bank robberies and kidnapping ventures than all of the other gangs combined during that period. So they were very, very prolific, but they were also very nomadic. They had several hideout locations that they would go to, but really no home base, if you will. I think that when Ma and Fred were killed, that was their last hideout. And I think that that's where they're perfectly comfortable staying. The reports of the hauntings started pretty much right after the shootout. Neighbors of the house were saying that the lights would come on. Visitors to the house would say that they would hear footsteps or glasses clinking, drawers being opened and such. So the reports of the haunting started almost immediately. And in my mind, they had no connection to the land, right? They had just rented it 2 months prior. So there was no connection there. There was no familial ties whatsoever. And so I think that's why they went with the house, is because that was their last known hideout, if you will.
Wow. If you don't mind, I'd like to go to the Lizzie Borden House in Massachusetts. Like I have a friend, Sam Baltrusas. He was on the show, The Curse of Lizzie Borden, that's on the Discovery Channel. I don't know if you ever watch any of the shock docs that's on that channel.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and they had like a dealing with a negative entity. And when I made a documentary called Afraid of Nothing, and I had a shaman go to the house, and he came up with a really dark entity in the basement that had been there before the house, he felt, and actually Sam felt the same way true as well. Did you have that experience? I mean, I think from the videos I've watched and listening to podcasts, you mostly go to locations and you don't run across a lot of the dark entities. You're very respectful, and so you don't have any of that like demonic aftermath that follows you home or anything. Did you notice or pick up on anything negative or heavy at the Lizzie Borden house?
No, we didn't. And to your point, I think the way that we structure our investigations, and this is just us as Soul Sisters, we go in with that sense of respect and what I call the right intentions. And for us, right intentions really means going in with the intent of speaking to an entity that wants to tell their story. So we do not go in with bravado. We don't go in with chest thumping or anything like that. We legitimately are there for two reasons. One, to experience the history of the location, and then two, to tell the story of any entity that wants to communicate with us. And so because of that, we've never felt that we've connected with anything that is negative or demonic, or anything like that is physically threatening or spiritually threatening to any of us on the team. Now, that being said, there are locations where we've experienced things that we consider darker, but not to say that's demonic or negative. It's just the location. So for example, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary or West Virginia State Penitentiary, those locations that had individuals that weren't so great in life, they're not going to be that great in death, right? So we've had experiences with that. And in those instances, we just say, listen, this is your space. We understand that this is your space. If you want to communicate with us, we're going to leave a night vision video camera here. We're going to leave a voice recorder here, and you can communicate or interact with those things, but we're going to back out of your space and leave it to you and go to somewhere else on the property. And that's really kind of how we deal with those darker entities. But again, nothing that we've experienced has been demonic or threatening to us. And so back to the Lizzie Borden house, that's kind of what we felt as well. Just going in for the historical perspective, it's a fascinating house to go into. Really, when you know the backstory and then see the way the house is configured, it's very interesting to couple those two things together, the historical narrative and the actual physical layout of the house. And so for us, that was extremely interesting in and of itself. When we did the investigation there, we were capturing things that, again, we cannot explain. So there were 5 of us on this investigation. It was myself, my twin sister, Jenny, Michelle, my other sister, our friend Cara, and then Miranda from Ghost Biker Explorations. She's another paranormal investigator that we really appreciate her style. So she was accompanying us on this investigation. And so the first thing that we do when we go into a location is we turn on our voice recorders. So even if we're, schlepping in our luggage, we've got voice recorders running because you never know what you're going to catch in the moment. And so we had set up voice recorders in the parlor where Andrew Borden his body was found. And we had also set up a night vision video camera, but we were still upstairs kind of unpacking and stuff and getting our equipment ready to go. And Jenny and Michelle were downstairs in the parlor, and they were just talking about the day, not really anything about the investigation of the house, just talking about some things that had happened during the day. And you can hear a man's voice on the voice recorder saying, "I'm standing right here next to you." Neither one of them heard it in the moment. So of course they didn't acknowledge it, but it's there on the voice recorder. Wow. And then about an hour later, Jenny and Cara were talking, and Cara was actually sitting on the replica couch there that Andrew Borden was killed on. And Jenny was across the parlor, and they're just talking about the differences between the Lizzie Borden house and the Villisca Axe Murder House, because we had investigated that prior. So they were just talking about that. And Cara said, well, either way, being axed to death would be a horrible way to go. And we captured a man's voice saying it was. Again, very intelligent, but nothing that was threatening to us, but, just extremely compelling pieces of evidence.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you got more intelligent than residual there. It's funny. A lot of people think in going to historic places, it might be more residual. So have you ever found, as an all-woman crew, you go to some historic places where back in the day, they may not have been totally respectful to women. Have you ever found that when you went to some places where, even though you introduce yourself correctly, where they're not respectful to you? And have you ever sensed like a chauvinistic bias at any places? And the reason I ask, Kristy, I'll give you an example after you answer, which I experienced when I was at a mass paracon and there was a ghost hunt at a place where it really freaked a woman out. But I want to hear if it's happened to you first.
Mm-hmm. Not so much anything that's been chauvinistic. I actually think that in places like jails or prisons, we get a different type of response than a male team or a co-ed team would get. Again, because of how we investigate and our investigation style. Brushy Mountain for us was extremely active, and I think it was because the fact that we're an all-female team. I think probably kind of looking back, one of the EVPs that we got at Henry River Mill Village, I guess could be considered a little bit chauvinistic. Henry River Mill Village is in North Carolina, and it's a former mill village that was, early 1900s where they made textiles. After the textile mill burnt down in 1977, the village just kind of ceased to be, right? Because there was no reason for the villagers to stay there because there was no work. So it really became abandoned. So you've got all of these mill houses that are just standing there, pretty much abandoned, as I said. And so we had gone in there and we had several pieces of equipment set up in these different houses. And one of them was a voice recorder and a night vision video camera in the kitchen of one of these former houses. And there was nobody around at the time. And we captured a voice. It was almost yelling. It said, "F, that's cold," like almost like the food is cold, right? And so I think if I look back on them, just kind of quickly going through my mind, I think that would be a little bit chauvinistic. But I think we actually get different responses because we're an all-female team. But mostly it's, especially in the case with prisons, I think it's almost like a show off. Like, these are all women. I'm going to show off for them. Right. So here's this door slam, the footsteps that we hear running, the shadow figures that we've been able to capture. I think it's more of that more than chauvinistic. It's more like okay, I'm going to show them that I'm really here and see if we can maybe freak them out.
Yeah. The only reason I asked is there were two instances that I was familiar with. One was right down the street from the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. Medium had kind of a bad experience in the cellar, which he thought might have been due to the ghost not liking women, Yeah. And then I was actually in Mass Paracon in 2019. I was in Western Mass, Lenox, Massachusetts. There's a place called Vent Fort Hall, and it was owned by Sarah Morgan, who's a sister of J.P. Morgan. And so there was like an investigation, and there was this room on the second floor, and there was a woman who's a paranormal photographer. And literally, she and another woman had grabbed me and said, "Go in this room." There was an empty room on the end of the hall to the right. And they're like, "Do you see anything in there? Do you feel anything?" And I felt nothing. And they both felt a very, angry man, like looking at them, like not at me. And it actually freaked out one of them so much that she left. She was like, I didn't sign up for this. And she like kind of literally,
Wow.
I know you guys never flee, but she like literally left
Wow.
right away in the middle of the so I was just curious because sometimes, in the earlier historic places, there could be a negativity about how people treat people. But what's unique about your group that I love is that the whole process, the respectful process, the way that you go in, the way that you introduce yourselves, the way that you kind of don't attract the negative energy. And we'll talk about your process. But one thing that blew me away was you'll come in with, like, for say example, there's 10 rooms. You'll put 10 recorders in a room. You'll let them go the whole night. And you will go back and listen to them on headphones. You'll listen to like 100 hours of tape, which I think is mind-blowingly dedicated. It's crazy.
It is. It's both dedicated and crazy. But, we just feel that to do the investigation justice, that's really what we need to do. We don't put the audio through any type of audio software to look for blips or anything like that. The first couple investigations, we did try to do that, and we found that we were missing a couple of things. And so, like, well, then why would we do that? We'd rather just listen to it in the raw and see if we can capture, see what we actually captured. And for us, that's the best way to do it, because it, in our minds, gives it a little bit more legitimacy that we're sitting there and watching everything and listening to everything. And so it does. It gets very tedious. The one thing that is different about our technique, which, it could be a detriment to what we're doing, is the fact that we don't give our audience that instant gratification. Like we'll tell people on Facebook, hey, we're at Post Town Elementary tonight, but it's still 3 or 4 months down the road until we can get that video out and produced because it takes such a long time. And so that's the only thing, people think that, like the TV shows, you go in, you capture something in 45 minutes, you're done and out. And it's really not like that. I mean, in these investigations, we're there anywhere from 8 to 24 to 48 hours sometimes. And to your point, we go back and watch everything and listen to everything. And so it does get tedious, but that's really the style that we've adopted, and it works for us.
Yeah, that's a tremendous amount of stamina and strong attention span. I've only done EVPs for if it's like 10 minutes, I mean, I get distracted, I have a hard time. And a lot of times EVPs sound like a faint voice behind a wall. You have to really pay attention and zero in on it. So kudos to you. I think I'd like to use that to segue to your process. But before I ask that, I know you don't use a medium when you go to places, or I don't think you use a medium as part of your team. Is there anybody on your team that has psychic ability, or who is the most psychic?
I wouldn't say that we have psychic ability or that we're empaths per se. I do think that because we're an all-female team, we are more empathic, or we go in with more empathy, not empathic. We go in with more empathy, I think, as an all-female team, because I think we can relate, especially in instances where we're attempting to communicate with children or women's spirits. I think we have a different mindset, if you will, than an all-male or all co-ed or a co-ed team. So to answer your question, none of us are psychic. Now, my twin sister and I, we do have a different connection, a different bond than most siblings do. And I think on some levels that allows us to see things a little bit differently and communicate a little bit differently, especially because between the two of us, I do think that there is that empathic connection, but neither of us would claim to be an empath per se.
And do ghosts ever confuse you and your sister? I don't know if you're identical twins, but you're twins. Do they ever say Kristy, or do they ever say your sister's name? And you're like, no, I'm Kristy, or is anything like that?
No, we are identical. And there's been instances where we've had our names called. But coincidentally enough, it's been when we've been together. There's been several times, at Hales Bar Dam, which is in Guild, Tennessee. There's a series of tunnels that run underneath this dam. So Jenny and I just happened to be sitting down there in this tunnel system, and it was just the two of us at this point. I yelled down the tunnels. I said, "Can anybody say my name?" And it yelled back, "Kristy." So we've gotten that. We've had spirit box sessions where it will say both of our names, Jenny and Kristy. So I don't know if they've confused us or anything like that, but we've both been fortunate enough to have our names called.
And I know none of you guys, you never run from a building, but is there a member of your team, your sister, or any of your friends, who's the bravest one that will do anything? Like, oh, I'll go down that small hole in the floor and crawl in.
Honestly, Michelle, our younger sister, she's the one that is like, oh, let's go. Every now and then you'll have that moment of trepidation. It's like, okay, should we really be going down there? And also not from so much of spiritual fear, also a physical fear. Some of these places that we're traipsing through, you've got to be physically prepared for anything. Henry River Mill Village, you've got to climb through the windows where broken glass is hanging to get into some of these houses. Or Hales Bar Dam, as I said before, you're walking through a series of these dark tunnels. So you've got to be mindful of that. But, Michelle's really the one that says, all right, here we go. Even though all of us on the team, because when you get into these locations, for us anyway, it really is about that sense of exploration and really trying to figure out what is going on scientifically if we can. It's also about debunking, see if we can find a natural or environmental cause to what people may be considering a haunting. And so all of us go in with that mindset. And when you get into a location and you have that mindset, it becomes more of a research project, more so than a paranormal investigation, because you're in there really trying to figure out what's going on. All of us have that really independent streak, and we go in there and really kind of get it done.
Yeah, you mentioned the research part. You guys do a great thing with something called triggers, which are items that you think will spark a conversation, I guess, right? Or maybe get a reaction from a ghost. Can you talk about maybe just a couple of your most successful triggers that you've brought to a location?
Sure, absolutely. And to your point, that's absolutely correct. So we will take in an item or fashion an item that we feel, based on our historical research, that we feel will elicit a response from a spirit in the location. The two that really come to mind is Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia. This was a Revolutionary War fort. It was also used during the Civil War for both Union and Confederate prisoners. It held munitions during the Korean and Vietnam War. So the history of this location is just fantastic. But during the Revolutionary War, on the grounds of the fort, they've got these underground bunkers called casemates, and they would store munitions in these casemates because it's cool and it's dark, and it houses them very well without the fear of explosion. So there's one casemate called Casemate 11, which is about 7 feet underground. It's a very narrow little room. So once you go down the steps and into this doorway of this room, it's all made out of stone, and probably, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 people could fit in there comfortably, a very small room. So during the Revolutionary War, it was repurposed into a solitary confinement cell. And there was a guy by the name of William Howe who was tried for treason. He was held in that cell, and then he was executed on the fort grounds after the Revolutionary War. And so we talked among ourselves. We're like, what would somebody in solitary confinement want, right? If you're in solitary confinement, you'd probably want water. You'd probably want food. We took a cigarette in as well. So we left those things in that room for him. And we said, Mr. Howell, these are your things. And if you can manipulate them if you want, they're here for you. We recognize that you were in solitary confinement. And then we left, and we just left them there for him. And so during the night, Cara and I went down into that room, and it was just the two of us. So we're just talking, and I said, Mr. Howell, did you see the things that we left you? We left you some water. We left you a cigarette. And we got the word thank you. A very deep male voice said thank you. We captured it on everything that was recording inside that room. And then later on during the night, when we were all on the other side of the fort, we captured a shadow figure walking through the laser grid that we had set up that was sitting beside the night vision video camera. You see a shadow figure walk from right to left across the screen, and it cuts off all of the beams of the laser as it walks across this room. And so for me, I think that was because we recognized what he needed and what he wanted, and we left that in there for him as a quote unquote trigger. The other one that was kind of interesting was when we went the second time to the West Virginia State Penitentiary there in Moundsville, West Virginia. There was a prisoner in that facility known as Red Snyder. His name was Red Snyder, and they called him Red. And he was in there for murder, but he was a really, really bad guy. He was the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. Basically, anybody in the prison that he thought needed to be killed ended up dead. And he was actually killed in his cell by what he thought was a friend, but he was stabbed so many times in his cell that they said that when the guards went in to get his body, the blood was coming up to their ankles. That's how much he was stabbed. So anyway, but while he was in prison, he had two vices. The first one was tobacco and the second one was watching Days of Our Lives. So every day they would wheel the TV in front of his cell, let him watch Days of Our Lives, and then take the TV away. So because of that, we downloaded an episode on Days of Our Lives onto my laptop, and we left it run in his cell. We said, Red, we know you like Days of Our Lives. Here's an episode for you to watch. We're going to go investigate somewhere else. Enjoy. And so we hit play and we walked away and let it run for an hour. When we came back, we had a very interesting, what we call a K2 session with what we believe is the spirit of Red Snyder. So a K2 is, it's a small handheld device that's designed to measure electromagnetic energy. It has a light array on it that goes from green all the way to red being the most powerful, where if there's a lot of energy acting upon it, it will spike to red. Now, the only thing in my house that I have found lights this thing up to red is when you put it by the microwave and turn it on, or you have a hair dryer that's running and it's on, or something that of that magnitude. Yep. That's how much energy it takes to get this thing to spike to red. So we're standing there in front of the cell, and there's two K2 meters, a black one and a gray one, and Kara's holding one and Michelle is holding one. And we start asking questions, and depending on the answer, we tell it to light up the black or the gray one. And it did this. So theoretically, if there's any energy acting upon these meters, both of them should have been going off at the same time. But one was going off when we asked it to. The second one was going off when we asked it to. So we had a really cool back and forth session with these K2 meters. And at the end of that, we were closing down, and I said, thank you. And from behind us, a male's voice goes, no, thank you. And so I think that was the spirit of Red, really saying thank you for us acknowledging what he liked and letting him have that Days of Our Lives video for an hour.
Yeah, what is it about Days of Our Lives? Because my mother loved that show too, and she never watched TV.
Listen, I think everybody in the the 70s, 80s, and 90s grew up with Days of Our Lives. I don't know, just one of those things.
Like Dark Shadows. Remember, like back in the day, I was a little kid, obviously, but I like Dark Shadows.
Well, it's funny. I don't think I've watched an episode since like the 1990s, but I'm sure if I turned it on right now, it would still be the same storyline.
Yeah.
So it'd just be able to pick up right back up where you left off.
Well, I got to tell you, after watching Ozark season 4, I don't know if you watch like Netflix, but that's like the best written show on TV, and all my immediate, friends watch it, like binge it the first night. I was funny. I was making a joke. I was like, if you think you're having a bad week, watch an episode of Ozark, because they like troubleshoot things left and right. It's crazy. It's just a super great show. Those are great triggers. Do you ever communicate with other paranormal groups and share notes, and where they say, yeah, this trigger worked for us, or if I'm going to this location, this is the room that worked best for me? Do you communicate with other groups at all?
Absolutely. So the paranormal community, it really is, when you find teams that are really like-minded in the sense that they're in it for the exploration, they're in it for the history and the preservation of these locations. When you really start delving into the community and finding those teams, it really is a very close-knit community. So there are teams all over the country and all over the world that we'll speak to, mostly on Facebook. Primarily we'll message through Facebook or sometimes through email, and really kind of get to know those teams. But yeah, absolutely. If somebody investigated Fort Mifflin or, the Grand Old Lady Hotel in North Carolina, it'll be like, hey, I was there on this floor. We captured this, and this is what we used. Or I was at the Lizzie Borden House and we did this. I highly recommend that, you turn on your voice recorders right when you step into the house. So absolutely, we'll talk between each other, between our teams. And we've actually have done collaboration investigations with other teams as well, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, it's a very close-knit community once you really delve into it and kind of start talking and making friends throughout.
So are there any guys, if I ever showed up on a location, would I get thrown out, or would it be okay? Or do you ever have guys?
No, we've had guest investigators who are guys. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Next time you come to Massachusetts, there's a ton of great places. I know, Lizzie, but did you go to any other places in Massachusetts when you were out here? Or?
We really didn't. It was one of those that we only had a certain amount of days because everybody on the team, we all have other full-time jobs. Yeah. So logistically speaking, when we go to a location like this, most of the time, I'm driving because, we don't want to trust our equipment to the airlines. Yeah. And so I will drive to that location. Everybody else will fly in. I'll pick them up and do that. So logistic wise, unless we have it really kind of planned out, it's very hard for us to get to multiple locations. Yeah. So in that instance, no, we were just there for Lizzie Borden.
Yeah, Massachusetts is a small state, and you can get to a lot of places within 2 hours, an hour. I mean, like I say, right down the road, there's the S.K. Pierce Victorian Mansion. That's like one of the most haunted places, theoretically. You know, it's been on the Travel Channel, and there's like another place in Winchendon. Oh, God, and there's the Oliver House is in Concord. There's a ton of places. So, well, next time you come down here, let me know. I'll let you know, because you could probably hit up a bunch of places if you ever make it out to this neck of the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
I'd love to hear about your process, because your process is different. I mean, you really put the time in with the research, so you know the triggers. And so when you go, so if you don't mind, and I know your video on your website covers it a little bit, but just kind of the process that you have when you go to a location, how you identify it, what do you do before you get there, what do you do when you're there, and what do you do afterwards?
Sure, absolutely. So we consider ourselves paranormal investigators. And the reason I say that is because there is a difference between what I consider paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and those that are really more of YouTubers. Paranormal investigators are those that are really going to go in. They're going to really research the historical narrative of the location, really do a deep dive into the background of the hauntings and you know, the research minded aspect of an investigation. Ghost hunters are going to be more of those that just kind of want to go in and see if they can have an experience. And then YouTubers are really those that are going in, probably doing a live for a couple hours, trying to get their viewership up or their TikTok numbers up. And that's pretty much it. That's the only real relationship they have with the location. So for paranormal investigators, of which we consider ourselves, the process is for us, we go and do a very deep dive into the historical stories of the location to really find out who lived there, what events happened there, any tragedies that occurred there. And to your point, that really leads our investigation with regard to questions as well as trigger items. So then we will go in and we will take a day tour of the location first, because we want to see it in the daylight to see if we can account for anything environmental that could cause somebody to think that there is a quote unquote haunting going on in the location. So we look for street lights, traffic noise, airplane noise, train traffic, dogs in the neighborhood, kids in the neighborhood, anything like that, that during the night of the investigation, if we hear anything that sounds similar to those things, we rule it out as being environmental and not paranormal. And then we also take notes on where we can leave stationary night vision video cameras and stationary voice recorders in that location. So once we get there at night, we're pretty much ready to go with a game plan on who's going to set up what, where. And so then we'll go in, we'll do that. And then we'll have the investigation. We'll ask different questions in different locations, different rooms, really sit with the location, because unlike television, we'll sit in a room for an hour, hour and a half, really just talking to the dark to see if we can get a response, both audibly in the moment or capture anything on those stationary voice recorders. We also have handheld equipment that will take things like those K2 meters that I mentioned before, thermometers to get a baseline reading. We'll take things that are called REM pods, which also measure electromagnetic energy. Flashlights, we'll have flashlight sessions.
I have a question about the flashlights, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Two things, actually. One, do you guys wear body cams?
We do.
As kind of like a secondary. Okay, that's smart, because then you're not even thinking about it, right? And what type of flashlights you use? The ones with a button where you have to press it down, or the ones that is there a certain type of flashlight that's best to use for paranormal investigations?
For the first question, yes, we do wear body cameras because we want a timestamp of where everybody is at all points during the night, so we can cross-reference that if we capture anything on our equipment. The flashlights that we personally use are just small mag lights that have a twist bottom. You'll twist them off, and the idea is that the spirits can use their energy to turn that flashlight on. And we've been very successful with our flashlight sessions. We don't use them as a primary source of unexplained evidence, but if you've got the flashlights going off at the same time you're capturing an EVP, at the same time the K2 meters going off, that really builds your case that something unexplainable is going on. For example, when we were at the Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, we were trying to communicate with the spirit of a girl named Emily in one of the rooms there at Tala. And so there was no power in this room. And so on the windowsill of the room, we had a glow-in-the-dark balloon, we had the K2 meter, and we had the flashlight sitting all three side by side. And we were sitting back probably about 8 feet from those items. And so we were just talking to Emily and said, if you're here, can you touch something on that windowsill? The balloon starts to roll off the same time the K2 meter spikes, at the same time the flashlight goes off. And so the building on those three things, that really just boom, 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 A, B, C builds my case that something is manipulating that in the windowsill. So that's kind of how we utilize the flashlights, really in conjunction with other tools. So we have that. We've got, we use a device called the Spirit Box, which generally speaking is an AM/FM radio that's been modified to very quickly sweep through frequencies.
Yep.
So when you turn it on, you'll hear it go as it's sweeping through these frequencies. The idea is that spirits can use the white noise to communicate. When you're in a location, theoretically, you should not hear a full phrase because this thing is going about, every eighth of a second, it's switching to another frequency. So you should never really hear a full phrase. But there's been instances where we will get words come through, we will get sentences coming through, and that's very interesting to us. So we'll use that.
The EVP that you mentioned earlier, was that the one in Prospect Place, Mansion, Ohio, where they said they're here to talk to us?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned one earlier. I don't know if it was that one or another one, but that, they're here to talk to us is, what is that? That's like 6 words put together that make total sense, which kind of blew me away as well.
Yeah. And that was not on a spirit box. That was just actually an EVP that was captured in the air, through the air.
Oh, on a recording. Wow.
Yeah. That was actually spoken audibly in that room. There was no spirit box or any other portal or anything like that was being used. That was just an EVP that came through the air in that room.
That's even more impressive.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, when we were at the Ma Barker house, now, when you picture a spirit box, this is a very small, it fits in the palm of my hand. The distance that it travels, it's very small. So the Ma Barker house, as I said before, it's in a small town called Ocklawaha, Florida. It's literally a one stoplight town. The house itself sits on 40 acres by itself. No roadways, no light pollution, no noise pollution, anything like that. So when we turned on the spirit box in the kill room up there, we weren't getting any AM or FM frequencies at all coming through, nothing. And so we turned it on and you can hear the as it's going. And I asked, what happened in this room? And through the spirit box, it said, they murdered us. We the ones dead.
Wow.
And if you listen to it, if you listen to that EVP, you can hear those words, and behind it, you can hear the spirit box still going through those frequencies. Oh. And so for me, that's one of the best pieces of audio that we've captured from the spirit box. And it really does give legitimacy in my mind to that tool. So we use that a lot. And we have other various tools that we use. So after the investigation, to your point earlier, we break everything down, and then we will watch every piece of audio every piece of video that we recorded, and listen to every piece of audio that we recorded that night, and then really put together anything compelling that we found. We will put that out on our video.
So just so people following at home, that's every body cam, whether it's 2 or 5 of you, that is, up to 10 or so recorders if you leave them in rooms and you leave them overnight, and the cameras, like you bring any night vision cameras or whatever, that's looking at all that, so, and any other cameras you may have around. So that's a tremendous amount of research.
It is. I've got 3 external hard drives that are 3 terabytes each. And I mean, I'm buying a new hard drive probably every couple of months, because we, the body cams in particular, they just have so much storage.
Yeah.
And we don't get rid of really any evidence, or any of the recordings. We always keep it and store it just in case.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask, how do you archive all the research? Are you going to put it on a website? Is there a museum that you have, or do you just kind of keep it in a storage room? Yeah.
Well, on a sidebar, I do have a museum, but not for this. No, we just really just keep it. It's in a filing cabinet in my house there. And after the investigation, we'll download everything onto my laptop first, so I can watch everything and listen to everything, and then edit and put together the video. And then after that, everything gets transferred over to an external hard drive. And then I back up that external hard drive. So we've got a lot of places where all of our data lives.
Yeah, when you become iconic like Edward Casey or something, they're going to have all your back files and go through it, and you'd be a series down the road. I heard on one of the podcasts you like the Dead Files. If there was a show that you liked the Dead Files. And it's funny, you know what I think when I think of maybe it's the later ones. The later ones, it's like every episode, there's not just one ghost. It's like when she sits down with them, there's like a menu of ghosts. There's like a demon, there's like a dark entity, there's a cursed ground with some angry Indians, and there's an alien. It's like I noticed as the show went on, and I wonder if you did too, that they really upped the ante almost in every house of what was tormenting these people. It wasn't just one ghost; it was like many, many things.
They do. And to be honest with you, I haven't watched it in several seasons. Most of my downtime, if I have any, it is spent watching audio and listening to audio and watching video of our investigations, because I do kind of have a backlog right now. That one, to me, when it first started, I really liked the concept of the two of them not really communicating at all, to see if they can really eliminate that bias with what they were finding, what she was finding. But as all television shows go, there has to be that sense of sensationalism, and you have to have a way to maintain your audience base. And, I think all of them really start to digress into a little bit more elaborate, a little bit more demonic, a little bit more dark, really to hold that audience base. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. If the audience wants it and the show can sell it, perfect. That's great. But
unless you're the homeowner, that's still
right. Exactly. But, the audience does have to know that it is very different from what we actually do. Those of us that call ourselves paranormal investigators, it's very different when you're a team of 5 people, all self-funded, going in and really putting these together as a labor of love, versus a television show like TAPS, where they have a producer and they have writers and they have film crews and all of that. Like, for example, at Fort Mifflin, we were there for a night, the 5 of us, doing all of the research, doing all the investigations. TAPS was there for a week. I mean, they were actually told when they do these shows, you have to wear the same thing for continuity purposes. So it's very much different than what you see on television. Again, not that those shows are bad, but you do have to realize, if you're an audience member, that there has to be that sensationalism to really keep your attention.
No, this is refreshing talking to you, because actually, there are a small amount of paranormal groups that I've talked that actually have this kind of more realistic approach. Mm-hmm. I definitely want to respect your time, Kristy. I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, 2 more questions, and then
Sure.
I have you tell the audience where they can kind of follow you and what's coming up for the new year, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the first question is a little philosophical. It's, after 7+ years of investigations, have you found answers, or do you have even more questions about the paranormal with all your investigations?
For me personally, we have found answers. In my personal journey with this, those answers really revolve around what happens after we die. But my sisters and I, we come from a religious background, a Christian background, but our parents always allowed us to make up our own minds about a religion and death and so on, and those questions, and really to find the answers for ourselves. And journey has really allowed me to do that. It has given me more of a sense of peace about what happens. I think that, once we pass, it's not a journey that we take alone. I think that there are people that we have loved that go before us, that meet us to kind of soften that transition. I do think that there are spirits that have the energy that is closer to the veil that we can speak to, and that's who we're communicating with on these investigations. So for me, it's answered those questions, but it really has, opened more questions up. What comes next? What different tools can we use in the field to get better communications? Where is this going in the future? My background is actually in biometric identification systems. And so facial recognition, voice recognition, fingerprint recognition, and such. And to me, I think it'd be very interesting if we could get a voice sample from, say, my grandmother who passed, right? And if I were to capture a voice in her house, if we could match that up with a voice recognition system to say, yes, this is without a doubt your grandmother or your Nana.
Yeah.
And so things like that, I think, are very interesting to think about with regard to future technology. So those are the type of things that we've questioned and we've answered on our personal journey.
In a nutshell, your religious faith and your scientific curiosity, which demands evidence-based data, they've kind of gelled. They haven't been in a battle. They've worked together on these investigations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, my faith has actually been strengthened on this. To me, there's always been the recognition in my mind that there are angels, there are spiritual beings that are there. Some of them are heavenly and some of them are those individuals who have died. They had a human existence, they died, and now for whatever reason, they're allowed to communicate with us. And for me, it has really strengthened my belief that there is an afterlife, that there is something after this, and we just don't cease to be. So there's never been any battle or, one scientific belief taking over or the religious belief taking over. They've really been in lockstep, honestly, from what we've been doing.
That's great to hear. And the last question kind of leads up to that. If you don't mind, tell us a story, your personal story about your grandfather and your Nana, which was an early childhood thing, which I don't know if it triggered your interest in the paranormal, but it might have been, I don't know if it was your first experience, but it was an early experience that you had.
Well, we were actually just really starting Soul Sisters Paranormal when this happened. So this actually happened in 2016.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, you've always been young, Kristy. So yeah.
There you go. Great answer, Bob. Nice. way to do that. So my Nana and Granddaddy were married. Really, they loved each other through that marriage. And unfortunately, my grandfather passed away unexpectedly in 1986. And my grandmother, she did have other boyfriends after that, and she did remarry briefly. But really, my granddaddy was her love, her true love. And so in 2016, and I was very close with my Nana. In fact, I'm named after her. So she and I had a very close bond, a very close relationship. And so 2016, I had a dream, and it was to this day, it's still the most vivid dream I've ever had in my life. And it happened 3 nights in a row. So the first night, I dreamt that I was in this house that Nana and Granddaddy lived in, and it was right outside his home office, and very, very specific where we were standing and very detailed. I can tell you the pictures that were hanging on the wall. I can tell you, how the carpet felt under my feet in this dream. And my granddaddy comes out of the office door, looks at me, moans, and then turns and walks through the wall. And it scared me. So I jumped up. It was almost a nightmare for me. So I jumped up, and so I'm panting for a little bit, and then I end up going back to bed. The next night, same exact dream, same everything. Again, I can tell you how he smelled, how he looked, the drawstring on his pants, how they were tied, and all of this, very detailed. And so it happened once more, and I was talking to my mom about it, and I said, I've had this dream that Granddaddy has come to me in this dream, and it's very, very detailed, but he doesn't say anything. He just kind of moans and walks through the wall. And off the cuff, my mom said, well, just ask him what he wants. And so the next night I had the dream, and in the dream I said, Granddaddy, what do you want? And he looks at me and he said, I'm waiting on your Nana. You're going to be getting a call soon. And he walks out of the wall. What do you do with that information, right?
It's even worse than he answered.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's one of those things. I told Mom about it, and she's like, wow, that's kind of fascinating or whatever. But after that, you really just don't think about it. So about 2 weeks after that dream, we got a call that my Nana had been in an accident. She'd fallen down a step, and she just pretty much demolished her hip. She was 94 at the time. And so we got to the hospital, and they gave her an operation to try to repair the hip, but she ended up developing MRSA. So she never really recovered from that accident. So we ended up putting her into hospice. She was there for about 5 weeks in hospice, which is kind of unheard of. But during that hospice stay, she was talking about seeing Granddaddy at night, and she was dancing with him. They loved to dance, that she was dancing with him and all of that. So on the day that she passed, we got to the hospice about 30 minutes after she passed. And I looked at my sister Jenny and I said, I know where she's going. She's going to the house that's depicted in that dream. I know where she's meeting up with Granddaddy. And so my family was there, and I said, do y'all mind if we do this? If I go to the house and we try this? And my family gave their blessings. And so Jenny and I left. We went home. We got our K2 meters and such, and some voice recorders, and we went to the house. And so it had been vacant, but my family had maintained it. So the power had been off and all of that. And so we went upstairs to the office that was depicted in the dream, and we're standing there. And there's a black K2 meter and a gray K2 meter. Again, there's no power. And so we started asking questions, and I said, Nana, are you here? And both of the K2 meters started going off like crazy. And I said, okay, step away and just go to the black meter, and just the black meter lit up. I said, okay, step away again. Now come to the gray meter, and just the gray meter lit up. I said, are you here with Granddaddy? And both of the meters started going crazy. And I said, are you okay? Both of the meters started going crazy. I said, okay, thank you. And so for me, that was validation that she had met up with Granddaddy and that they had ascended together. And the reason I say that,
that's a wonderful gift.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is because, in this scientific process, right, you want to do follow-up research. So about 2 weeks later, my sister and I went back with the same K2 meters. We stood in the same place and asked the same questions, and we got nothing. No responses, no blips, no feeling, no anything. And for me, again, that was validation that we had the opportunity to talk to her right after she passed, and that she is no longer a quote unquote spirit or ghost, right? She and Granddaddy have moved on. And so for me, back to your earlier question, that brought me a lot of peace because I was struggling with Nana's death because it did hit me hard. But after that, I was at peace, and I told my family, I said, she's okay. She's okay. She's with Granddaddy and she's okay.
Yeah, I mean, that shows it's intelligent residual that it didn't do a couple weeks later. And when the whole reason I started this paranormal journey was when my mother passed from Alzheimer's. I was making a first movie, and it just left me cold. And she had dementia, and she struggled the whole last week with every breath trying to cling to her physical body. And then when, of course, everybody stepped out of the room, that's when she passed quietly. And that's when I started on this journey. I made a documentary, and then I've been doing the podcast trying to talk to people that see things that I don't. So yeah, thank you. That was wonderful to hear because, it's a really comforting because it's a question, it's a journey we all have. So I appreciate your time tonight. I also would like to know where you've got a great website with a lot of great videos. Could you share your website, your YouTube location where people can check out all the good stuff you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the team is Soul Sisters Paranormal, and our website is www.soulsistersparanormal.com. We're also very active on Facebook under Soul Sisters Paranormal, and our YouTube channel is also under Soul Sisters Paranormal. So anything you want to know about us is all on those social media platforms.
Now, you're based in Florida, but do you have a museum somewhere else? I'm trying to remember. I thought I read somewhere.
I do. So I'm originally from Florida, and I still maintain residency there in Florida. But last year, in September of last year, my business partner and I, Miranda Young from Ghost Biker Explorations, she and I actually opened a museum inside the historic Scott County Jail in Huntsville, Tennessee. So the jail was built in 1904. It was in operation until 2008. And then it really sat vacant up until last year in 2021 when Miranda and I asked the town of Huntsville if they would allow us to open a museum inside. So we now have a very robust museum really detailing Scott County history and crime and punishment, as well as law enforcement appreciation. But it does have its haunted side.
That's great.
So we open it up for paranormal research. We've had 18 paranormal teams in here so far. Almost every single one has gotten some type of compelling evidence. We'll be sitting here during the day and we'll hear footsteps running up the stairs, or we'll hear something slam upstairs. So to us, it's a very active and very interesting location.
I mean, boy, what a great Christmas gift to yourself. This past year to do that.
Right. Now we just need people to come and visit, so it'll pay for my Christmas gift.
Well, so is that a website too? Is that a different? Would they find it from your Soul Sister website, or how do they find out to go there and book time there, or have buy tickets to go to the museum?
So it's the historic Scott County Jail, and our website is www.historicscottcojail.com, or you can find us on Facebook under Historic Scott County Jail. We're also very active on Instagram, again, under Historic Scott County Jail. So anything you want to know about us are on those social media platforms. All of our event schedules, you can book tickets to any of our events. You can rent the jail for a paranormal investigation. All of that information is on the website, www.historicscottcojail.com.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Kristy. I'm going to have to thank Mind Dog TV for this referral. It was a great interview, and not surprising. Like, I've listened to several podcasts you've been on, and you're always a pleasure. So, and always enlightening, and always kind of new. Not you always share good information, but a lot of times new stuff. So I appreciate it, and I wish you a very successful, happy, and somewhat haunted 2022.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode?
Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.